So now the Germans had lost the eastern part of the war, the Russian side of the war. Now we need to go back to the French and English side of the war in Europe, the western part of the war in Europe. And this was going to really start with the invasion of Italy, which we talked about before, but really become the main focal point of fighting with the Germans with a mission called Operation Overlord. This is the reinvasion of France on June 6, 1944. Here you see Dwight Eisenhower, who was the supreme commander of all the Allied troops. He was in charge of the war effort against the Germans. This would be 4,600 ships, over 1,000 bombers, 23,000 paratroopers, 150,000 soldiers heading for Normandy, France, which is just off the coast. If you've seen Saving Private Ryan, the first part of Saving Private Ryan is this invasion at Normandy. Next slide. Also, once we had taken the beach at Normandy, we relied on a guy named Patton. He used his own blitzkrieg methods, his own moving fast. In fact, he used to call him Guts and Glory Patton, meaning the soldier's guts and his glory. The French came up through Italy, and they were fighting with the U.S. Army. General Charles de Gaulle, is in charge of the French Vichy troops, which they are the first ones allowed back in Paris when Paris is retaken, and Charles de Gaulle becomes a war hero and later president of France. Battle of the Bulge is sort of the last gasp for the Germans. They almost won this battle, but the Americans are able to hold their lines and push the Germans back towards Germany. And you'll learn a little bit more about this battle from our Medal of Honor recipient worksheet we're going to do. America began to pour resources in. The worst thing about the Battle of the Bulge is how cold it was, which you can see from the picture above. 600,000 American soldiers moved into the forests that in and around Germany that the Battle of the Bulge took place in. Skip that. Finally, Germany is invaded through France and into Germany from the west by the Americans with the English and the French, and from the east by the Soviets. Since the Soviets lost somewhere up to about 18 million soldiers and citizens during this war, they were allowed to take the capital of Berlin because of the great sacrifice that they incurred fighting the Germans. They took the capital of Berlin, and here you see the communist flag going up over the Reichstag, which is kind of like the Capitol building in Berlin. Hitler commits suicide. Germany eventually surrenders, and we celebrate Victory in Europe Day, VE Day. And here you see a picture on the bottom. Times Square, New York City, when they announced the Victory in Europe Day. The war's not over. We're still fighting Japan, which we'll talk about in the next lecture. But the war's over in Europe, and there you can see the happy crowds in New York City. To give you an idea of what happened after the war, they had a conference in Yalta. There you can see the Prime Minister on the right, or the Prime Minister on the left, Winston Churchill, President Franklin Roosevelt in the middle, and Joseph Stalin on the right. Now, Stalin promised both Roosevelt and Churchill that there would be fair elections in Eastern Europe. And they split Germany to rebuild it into 4 zones: a British zone, a Russian zone, an American zone, and a French zone, which eventually became the red part is the communist zone, and the other 3 parts are the free zones. Those are the zones. And then inside Germany, in the capital, Berlin, they split that into 4 zones, same type of zones. And the USSR would promise to enter the war against Japan. They really planned at the Yalta Conference what Europe was going to look like after the war, which we'll talk about again later. And that is the end of this lecture.